Hello and welcome back to Virtuosi Concerts season 2021 and 2022. We are so glad to be back to producing live in-person concerts for our amazing group of supporters and subscribers. Thank you so much for joining us for this pre-concert chat. I'm here with pianist Chiu and cellist Cameron Crozman in anticipation of their presentation, cello piano recital called TAPEO on November 21st at 3 p.m. at St. Andrew's United Church in Winnipeg. Hello, Philip. Hello, Cameron. Thank you for
Hey,
joining us.
Maddie. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So before I launch into some of the questions, I just wanted to know, this is neither of your first time in Winnipeg. Phil, can you tell us the last time you were in Winnipeg?
That's a very good question. It was in the before times. And who was it with the last time? It was with my trio. I think it would have been with Jean-François and Marina, right? So that was with the Trio Canoe or Trio Canoe with the very talented Marina Thibault, who's now a prof at UBC, and Jean-François Normand, clarinet, who's a prof at the Montreal Conservatory, and this vagabond here. And we, as I always do in Winnipeg at Virtuosi, we had a wonderful time.
Fantastic. And Cameron, have you been to Winnipeg before?
Yeah, I've been to Winnipeg a couple times. Last time I was actually just through very briefly while I was doing a solo cello tour of like the U.S. Midwest and Canadian prairies. But that was very brief, as I said, and before that it was when I last played with the symphony, which was in February of 2019.
Amazing. Well, we are so thrilled that you will be returning soon. So let's discuss your very creative program, Tapeo. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. So, Cameron, I've heard that this program has been inspired by your cello. Again, El Tiburon.
That's right.
All right. Can you explain where and maybe who your cello comes from and how it got into your hands?
Yeah, so I am very fortunate. I have this instrument on loan from the Canada Council for the Arts Musical Instrument Bank. And as you mentioned, it's called El Tiburon, which means the shark in Spanish. And so that sort of reveals that it is a cello of Spanish origin, made, we think, around 1769, so just over 250 years ago, in Barcelona by a luthier named Johannes Giami. And it was I knew when I got this cello, I've had it for about nearly 3.5 years at this point. And I knew when I got it, there's something to do with the Spanish origin of the instrument. And it actually took COVID to make me sit down and think about a program of what would work best. And that's where this idea for tapeo came about. Tapeo, which in Spanish means to go for tapas, these famous small plates. And it also turns out to be the name of the first tapas bar I ever went to in Spain, in Barcelona as well. So that's where this idea came from, of a sort of musical tapas party, which is what the album became.
Wonderful. Sounds intriguing and kind of yummy.
Exactly.
Phil, can you talk more about this word tapeo and musically, how does the word tapas influence the selections for this program?
So here's what I'm going to tell you. The great thing about our duo, Cameron and I, is that we really love playing together, and we really trust each other, and we love bringing each other wild ideas. We each kind of birthed something, and the other one, we just drag the other one along with us. And so Tapeo, being Cameron's latest baby, I'm going to lob this question right back to him and let him explain. It's his big love. Go ahead, Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, I think what fascinated me with tapas, just in general, first of all, they're delicious. And there's nothing quite like uh, sitting down in the middle of a crowded tapas bar and all of a sudden you have a glass of wine and a whole bunch of small plates, and it's amazing. But I think what's also very interesting to me is that Spain is a very diverse country. It's had this diverse heritage historically, and because of that, we have all these interesting like influences that you find in the food. So you've got sort of Middle Eastern spices that came up through Africa, and you've got, of course, more European inspired things, and then you have many core ingredients like potatoes or tomatoes that came from the New World. And so the idea of the program for Tapeo was to try to capture this in musical form and capture these influences. And that's why we also have a couple works by composers from Hispanic America, from Mexico, from South America. And that's sort of where this all comes from.
Amazing. So a lovely sampling of works, Spanish works for the cello.
Yeah.
Love it. All right, so let's walk through the program. Cameron, there are some Spanish composers, as you mentioned, that we're going to get to, but I'm excited to see two big works right off the top, a Bach sonata for viola da gamba, and then a sonata by a lesser known composer, Jean Houret. Can you explain how a Bach sonata fits into this program and exactly what is a viola da gamba?
Yes, totally. And this is another one of these, as Phil mentioned, one of my crazy ideas that I came to Phil with at one point. And this one was, we had a recital recently in Montreal, and I came to Phil and I said, Phil, what if we, Pablo Casals, like this famous Spanish cellist, he played here like 100 years ago, and I found his programs. And so what if we just chose some music from his programs and we played that now? And that's where the both the Bach and the Houret came from. Pablo Casals, of course, very famous for having really revived Bach's music for cello. And Jean Houret actually wrote the sonata that we're going to be playing for Pablo Casals. But a viola da gamba is not exactly an ancestor of the cello, but one might think it would be, in that it's also played between the legs generally, and it looks very much like a cello, but it has more strings than a cello. It has six or more strings, and it's played a little bit differently. And it was the popular sort of between the legs instrument that was played before the cello became popular in the 1700s. But of course, now that the gamba has it didn't really quite stand the test of time the way the cello did, as cellists, we like to steal all of the gamba repertoire because why not?
It's so good because it's so excellent. And
Because it's so excellent.
People are playing gamba. Yeah, exactly.
And did the cello win out, kind of, as you could say, because it's just a stronger, louder instrument?
That's one of those great questions of history. I have no idea. It's fascinating because the viol really was, they had consorts of viols. So they had these ensembles that were all different sizes of viola da gambas. And there were many viol virtuosos. So it's hard to know why. And it's interesting that in Bach's time that, the cello was a relatively obscure instrument. And so that we even have these cello suites by Bach is quite surprising. Whereas the fact that there's gamba sonatas is a lot less surprising.
Interesting. All right, and then next we move into the sonata we were mentioning, the Jean Houret sonata. Phil, can you talk a bit about the sonata? What can we expect from this work?
A million piano notes. The Cameron loves throwing me these pieces that just so Phil. Hey, listen. There's this like lesser known work. I think it's so beautiful. By the way, it requires like 3 pianists to play. Is that all right? I say, sure, Cameron. Anything for you. Anything for our duo. But you know what? I would say 99% of the time, Cameron really discovers these gems, like these works that turn out to be just hidden for, again, just kind of for whatever reason. It's. I mean, Jean Houret in his case, right? He's this turn of the century, 20th century French composer. I think organist and composer, but if Cameron, you correct me at any time, but my understanding is that he more or less like moved from organ post to organ post, taking over for various jobs, and even wrote a book, I think, the organ and organists and all this kind of stuff. And he has sort of a bit of a smattering of compositions, whether it's some symphonies, some chamber pieces. Funny enough, like what I was just checking is that of the 3 sonatas, I think he wrote 4 sonatas, Cameron, for cello and piano.
3 sonatas.
3 of them are all in some form of F. There's the F major, there's an F sharp minor, there's an F sharp major. So there's something there. We'll never know what it was. But the one that you're going to hear, it's such a phenomenal work. It's this kind of one movement tour de force. It's when I first listened to it, I was really taken aback because I was, sometimes when you hear a sonata, you expect things to move in a certain kind of way and to take you along a clear kind of narrative. It's like watching a lot of Hollywood movies that you just kind of, you sit down, you expect them to move in the same way. And this is nothing quite like that. But then very shortly after, I think probably after the first reading with Cameron, actually, I immediately went, oh, okay, like I totally get more where this is headed. And wow, is it beautiful. And wow, what a unique way of storytelling. And wow, how much fun is this piece? The only other thing I might say about the work is that I said to Cameron probably 8 times in that rehearsal, I think this should be orchestrated. I think this piano part, this should be a cello concerto, not just because of the number of notes, but there is this sense, whether it's because of his career as an organist, that he imagined something so enormous. You will hear at the church when we play in Winnipeg, I am going to do my damnedest to just rip out an enormous amount of sound because he wrote like five fortes sometimes, and these enormous chords, and he's just asking for so much grandeur that the cello kind of weaves in and out of. It's a really amazing piece of music, and I'm so glad that Cameron brought it.
Oh, great. Well, that sounds like it's going to be such a happy celebration and such a momentous welcome back, Virtuosi.
We
So
hope so.
thank you. It's so important to do that digging for these lesser known works too. So thanks to you both for programming that. Okay, and then we get to some of Cameron's arrangements on the program. So Cameron, I'm really excited to hear your arrangement of an Albéniz piece. Can you tell us how you got into arranging? Is this a common quality that musicians, in musicians, and sort of what your process is?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, a year and a half ago, I would have never even imagined that I would be doing any sort of arranging. And somehow throughout the pandemic, the last year and a half, I found myself doing this arranging. And I think the idea for this particular piece, it's Albanese's sort of really famous Asturias. It's one of these pieces where even if you don't know the title, it's one of these pieces I'm sure you've heard. Mostly it's heard on guitar now, although he originally wrote it for piano. And when I was putting together the program for TAPEO, I noticed that most of the music I was selecting was actually arrangements. Unfortunately, a lot of the Spanish composers just didn't really write for cello. They wrote for piano because they happened to be pianists. But then it was cellists later on that would go and say, well, this is a pretty cool piece. I want to play this. And it was fascinating to me to see all of these famous cellists throughout history, whether it was, someone like Gaspar Casado, who was one of Casals' students, or Casals himself, that they would go and take these pieces and arrange them, and then their friends would play them too. There was this real sort of exchange, and it made me think, well, I love this Asturias by Albanese, and there's no real cello version of it that pleases me, and so why don't I make my own? And that's sort of where that came from, and I really tried to be inspired by these older arrangements from the last century. And of course, I definitely need to note that much of the piano part actually sounding any good is thanks to Phil. Since I would come to him with different versions, I'd be like, Phil, does this work? Is this playable? I don't know. So this is definitely a collaborative arrangement in that sense as well.
I gave some opinions, that's it. Cameron, unplayable. Okay, great, no problem. Cameron, too simple. Great, no problem.
Are you working on any more arrangements that go outside of this program?
Yeah, I'm actually doing one right now. Very different. It's a piece originally for viola da gamba by this French composer named Marais Marais, and I'm arranging it for cello and flute. And so that's also very interesting because it is a whole idea of and it's a set of variations really on this very simple theme called La Folia. And so it's interesting also to get into the music and to realize what can I sort of add to the music, what can I simplify in the music, and can I reorganize some of the variations to make my own. That's what I find fascinating about arranging. It shows sort of how we have this idea nowadays, I think, that like the composers set down these works and they're in stone and we've got to do everything. But then as soon as you start arranging it and start playing with the different options, you realize that really these pieces of music can be a starting point for so much more.
Mm-hmm. So my last question is, although this is a Spanish inspired program, we see a lot of French music with titles that allude to Spanish influence, like for example, Ravel's Habanera. Can you talk about the relationship between French composers and Spanish music? Why did not only Ravel, but why did so many of them compose music with such a rich, strong Spanish influence?
I guess
Great question. Go, Cameron.
Yeah, I'll just start off by saying one thing. I remember from my time in Paris, at some point hearing from someone that the best Spanish music was composed by French musicians, which I'm sure every Spaniard would disagree with. But it is true that there was this amazing fascination with Spain by French composers, and many of the Spanish composers on the program that we're going to be presenting lived for at least part of their life in Paris and did study there. So there's definitely exchange going on.
I mean, Ravel's mother, I mean, you say besides Ravel, but I mean, in Ravel's case, his mother being, what is it, a Basque? What am I thinking of,
yeah,
Cameron?
yes.
Right? So, I mean, he remembers his mother singing to him songs and all that kind of from not the French tradition. So that obviously is why we have these great flavors and these amazing works from Ravel. And it makes me think also of Debussy. You know that we were at one point we thought about programming Debussy's Étampes, right? The engravings. And one of the movements, the middle one, is the night in Granada, la soirée, whatever, in
La
Granada.
soirée à Grenade.
À Grenade, merci beaucoup. And again, Debussy had basically like never set foot in Spain. I think by the time he wrote this, he had passed like an hour or so for some reason. But it's very much the flavor, and I don't think it's just anecdotally, but I think it's written that De Falla, the great Spanish composer, said, "So okay, there is like not a single folk tune. There's not a note in here that comes from Spanish tradition." But he says, "But everything about this piece just lives and breathes Spain." Mm-hmm. So there is something like that they just understood and really captured about that culture and about
totally. And it goes all the way back to Bizet and Carmen. Really,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we think of this one of the most famous French operas of all time takes place in Spain, somewhat paradoxically. And as Phil mentioned, you know, Ravel grew up barely 20 kilometers from Spain. So in many ways, especially knowing that European borders for so long in history were very sort of in flux. And when you go to the south of France, you realize that, you know, the south of France and the north of Spain are not so different, actually.
Right. Well, before I let the two of you go, I would love to give our audience a little sneak peek of what to expect on Sunday, November 21st. So I'm going to share screen and sound the Zoom way, and maybe Cameron, before I do that, you can explain what is this minute and a half that our audience is going to be treated to right now.
Yes, so this is a little excerpt from, as we talked about earlier, my arrangement of Albanise's Asturias during the recording of Phil and I's album TAPEO. You can tell it was during COVID because my hair will be in a much less groomed state. But I hope you enjoy regardless.
Right. Well, here we go.
He got that harmonic every time. Never missed it. Never missed it.
Never.
Take that to the bank.
Well, that sounds so great, so full of energy, such a celebration. So thank you again both for your time today. Thank you for this very interesting chat. And Virtuosi audience, subscribers, supporters, please mark your calendars, November 21st, 3 p.m., St. Andrew's United Church in Winnipeg, our season opener. All right. See you both in Winnipeg. Thank you so much.
Very soon. We're going to go practice now.
Okay, bye.